So yesterday, I put out a little vlog about my short story slash what did they call it, a novelette. It's a little longer than a short story and not quite a novel. So there's this novelette range that you can fall into. And I released a little kind of a word of caution regarding that story to my readers, and that's just because I have a lot of young readers and a lot of readers who like the stories that I write because they're very carefree, they're very innocent, and they're very, I mean, let's face it, I write about Santa Claus and the elves and guardian angels, which are dogs, and, things like that. So with Shell coming out and it being a much darker, more disturbing kind of suspense story, I felt like I needed to release something. And I still am struggling with it just a little bit, in that I feel like I'm baiting people. Like, don't read this thing. It's disturbing and it freaks me out. But regardless, when I was talking about that, and talking about stories that are dark and can be scary or just downright disturbing, I mentioned Stephen King as being one of my favorite authors. And the reason why that is because I grew up in a very religious household. My father was an ordained minister. My grandfather was an ordained minister. My brother and I went to private religious schools for a while, and we weren't allowed to even listen to, rock and roll, much less watch scary movies and things like that. Now, that started to change as my brother and I got a little bit older. To my parents' credit, they didn't really keep us from being exposed to things like that as much anymore. But one of the things that I think kind of slipped through the cracks when I was 12 years old, my brother and I moved from Roanoke, Virginia to Virginia Beach. And wow, what a culture shock that was. There is or was in the 80s, a huge difference between growing up as a kid in the mountains or the valley of Roanoke, Virginia, and then moving to literally like within a half a mile or a mile from the ocean front in Virginia Beach. I mean, culture shock doesn't even begin to explain what my brother and I went through. But what happened was that summer we moved kind of at the beginning of the summer, and my brother was pretty quick to make some friends on the street that we moved into, in the neighborhood that we moved into. And I didn't see as many children my age, even though my brother and I are only about 18 months apart. So I spent a lot of time in the house that summer. And I think my dad was feeling bad for me. And he had moved us there and it was his job, but I think he was feeling a little guilty. And so he used to take me on his business trips and just out and about. And one day, I'll never forget it, we were at a grocery store called Farm Fresh, which wasn't that far from our house. And back then, the grocery stores used to have like little bookstores kind of inside, not just at the checkout like you kind of see today, but like legit like little bookstores. And they used to have like movie rental places inside the grocery stores and things like that. And my dad was with me, and he saw me looking at some books to pick up, maybe read some. I think paperbacks was what I was looking at, and he just said, "Well, pick one out. It's on me." And I thought, "Oh, that's cool," And he didn't seem to really care what I picked. So I literally looked for the thickest book I could find, and that looked kind of interesting. And that happened to be Stephen King's It. And it was a huge paperback. I mean, I can't remember how many pages that thing is, 900 pages, something like that. But it had a really cool cover at the time, which is actually, I don't think it has been equaled since then. It was a cover of like a drain grate and some claws coming up from it, and a little toy boat that is floating down the drain. I just thought that cover was spooky looking and kind of creepy. And I knew who Stephen King was, even though I kind of didn't. I had never read anything by Stephen King, and I had never. Maybe I had seen a movie or two. I think Firestarter had come out. The Shining isn't something that I would have been interested in as a kid. But you knew the name. You couldn't not know the name as an American in the mid to late 80s. And so I just grabbed it. I just pulled it off the shelf and went to my dad, and we checked out, and I kept waiting for him to kind of say, what's this? And no, you can't read that. I was 11, no, I was 12 years old. And he just let me get it. So I remember going home that day, and I remember going back to my bedroom, and I had like this little hand-me-down like love seat couch where I would just lay on that thing and read books. And up until that point, I had never read anything by Stephen King, and I had never read anything like that. I was real into, I liked like Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer stories. I liked Jack London, like Call of the Wild. I really liked that story. I was really into kind of stories about adventure and was kidnapped, and all those kind of fun stories back then. Even the Hardy Boys and stuff. But I remember starting reading it, and it opens up. If you haven't read the novel or seen the movies, which were amazing, by the way, not the television version with Tim Curry. Not that he wasn't a good Pennywise, but holy smokes, the movies just blow that out of the water. And I remember reading the beginning of the book and just being blown away. And I don't really, at this point in time, it's kind of hard to give away things these days or not give them away, but it opens up pretty horrifically and it's scary. And I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is nuts. And it was the first time I had read a book that literally just captured me. I felt like I was kind of, I was able to kind of look behind the curtain a little bit with that book. And like, what is it that the adults are able to see and read that the kids aren't supposed to? Because it was pretty clear at that point that what I was reading was not for the younger audience, let's say. And it's the very first time that I ever read a book that demanded that you sleep with the lights on. I mean, I remember it didn't take me long to read it. It took me a couple weeks, I think, because again, it's a big book. But it was the dead of summer. I didn't have school to worry about or anything like that. And at that point in time, I didn't have any friends to go play with. So I just sat around and read all day long. And, I read it in a couple of weeks, and I think I slept with the lights on, much to my parents' chagrin, because they would come in the middle of the night and turn them off. And that's terrifying. If you are a kid and you go to bed and you have turned your lights on and you wake up for a glass of water to go to the bathroom, whatever it is, at 3 o'clock in the morning, and it's pitch black, and you remember leaving those lights on, and is the closet door open? That sucked. But damn, I had never read anything like that. And at that point, once I got through that story, and as a 12-year-old, it can be hard to get through parts of that book. As an adult, it can be hard to get through parts of that book. But I remember finishing that thing, and I was just going to my parents like, I have to read whatever there is of Stephen King. And there was a little library that I could ride my bike to from where we lived. And coincidentally, it happened to be literally right on the property of the junior high that we would attend, my brother and I. And it was this awesome little library, and I would go in there, and I remember the first time I went in to check out a Stephen King book, the librarian wouldn't let me have it. I've been stopped at like Blockbuster Video or Errol's Video back in the day, trying to rent a rated R movie. The first one I ever got stopped was actually Pet Sematary by Stephen King. And the clerk actually called my parents to say, hey, is your son David? He has your card, and he's trying to rent a rated R movie. And my parents literally having to say, no, it's fine. He can rent that. But a librarian stopping me from checking out a book was kind of unheard of. There was a library before we moved to Virginia Beach that my brother and I would, and our friends would ride our bikes to all the time, and mainly because it was air conditioned in the middle of summer, and we would go in there and we'd find the comics, and we'd sit back in the corner and be quiet and kind of read. But it was because it was air conditioned and it was freaking hot. But I never had a librarian stop me from checking out a book. Again, we're talking 10, 11, 12 years old, so I wasn't trying to check out those books, but just because it had Stephen King on the title. And I think I remember asking the librarian, oh, did you read this? Is it scary? Thinking, I don't know what you've read, lady, but it is terrifying. And maybe she was trying to caution me, like, this is worse than that, But I wish I could remember what book it was that I was trying to check out that she stopped me from having until I think my dad had to go down there with me after work or something and help me check out the book. I want to say it was like Pet Sematary or Salem's Lot, or maybe even Firestarter or something. But yeah, I was addicted. And after that year, I asked for Stephen King books for my birthday. And at the time, Stephen King had this commercial out, and it was this the Stephen King Library, I think is what it was called. And you could get a Stephen King hardback every month or two, with like the original covers on them and things like that. And my parents signed me up for that. So whenever they would come in the mail, they'd hide them and they would keep them for like my birthday or Christmas and things like that. But yeah, after mentioning Stephen King in that little video that I recorded yesterday, I thought, that's actually a pretty good story and a little message to the kids that I know out there. I think it's important to scare yourself sometimes. And you could do worse than read a scary story from time to time. So yeah, that's me for 12 minutes talking about Stephen King's It, and the very first time I was exposed to Stephen King. But yeah, if you ever get a chance to read that book, if you haven't read it, or I hate to say go see the movie, but the movie, the two-parter recently, was actually excellent. So anyway, that was me learning that books can actually force you to sleep with the lights on. And to this day, about 2 weeks ago, I am rereading Salem's Lot by Stephen King. And I wanted to sleep with the lights on at least once. But yeah, definitely, I think it's important. And I think it's a good lesson to learn that books can scare you just as bad as the movies. And they can thrill you and they can excite you just as much as a film or a television show, if not 1,000 times more, to be honest with you. So yeah, that's my story on learning that books can force you to sleep with the lights on. So